Welcome to a second tutorial in this series called Web Apps. We're going to be able to use JavaScript, or better jQuery, to create an application that will create a story. Mad Libs. And so here's how it works. You put in a name and a few other details like the restaurant, the number, the comparison, and things, and it will create a story for you. Once you get to the end of the story, you click the Make the Story button, and you will see that all of the words that you used will fill in and create a custom-made story. So let's get into the code to make this happen. I'm going to use my text editor, Sublime Text, and start typing here. Let's create a standard web page using the regular headers and footers and body and other tags that are in every website. Let's save our work, and I'm going to name this thing as index.html. The first thing we need to do is start to add some title and some instructions to the top of the page. So let's put an H1 and a paragraph tag to tell the user what they have to do. Let's start a new paragraph tag, and then we'll create a story. At first, we just write the story without any formatting. And so just put the story together. You can use the one that I have on the screen, or if you want to invent your own, you can. Notice I have lots of descriptions in here, lots of nouns, lots of verbs, things that you're going to use in your story. And so it doesn't have to be a great work of art, but it does have to have a beginning, ending, a kind of a descriptive story. And so you should see something like that right there. The next thing you need to do is go find some places or some words that you're going to substitute in your Mad Libs. Let's take a look at the word Mike, for instance. Let's double click that. You can see that Mike is used several times on the page, and so I'm going to turn this into a class or a span with a class. So what does a span look like? You type in the word span, and then you give it a class name, and I'm going to call this thing, the name is name. And then at the end of Mike, I'm going to put in a close tag for span. Now, wherever I see Mike in the story, I'm going to use the same identical span tag. So ID is not the one I want. I want class equals name for each of those Mikes on the page. Okay, so there's an example of Mike using 4 different places using the class equals name. However, many of the words in here only occur one time in the story. So I'm going to substitute, for example, McDonald's for another span tag, and this time I'm going to give it an ID since it only occurs once in the story. So span ID equals, and then I'll use the word restaurant. And then at the end of McDonald's, I have a close tag for the span. Now remember, spans are inline items, and so they don't start new paragraphs, they just identify a piece of a sentence. So wherever you see a word that's in bold on here, I'm going to substitute it with a span tag and then use it as a class or an ID, depending on if it is used multiple times or just once. So I skipped ahead in the video here, but you can see what I've done. I have a span ID for restaurant for McDonald's. Then I have a span ID for something I added as called number equals 15. And then I have companion, and I use the word pets. And so all the way through here, I have a bunch of items that are called out as special words. If there's only one at a time in the story, I use an ID. For instance, people at a circus. However, if I have something that is used more than once in the story, for instance, marshmallows or a dessert, I use that as a class. And so classes and IDs are used either once for IDs or many times for classes. And so go through your story and highlight each of the words that are going to be substituted in your Mad Libs. So you probably have to pause the video here. If you want to copy what I have on the screen, you can, or invent your own. Next, let's make sure we have things formatted properly. So you notice at the top we have an H1 probably for the headline. And so we have a beginning and an end tag. And then for each of these paragraphs, we should have a beginning paragraph tag and an ending paragraph tag. So that pretty much highlights all of the special words in our story. Next, let's add some CSS formatting so it looks more like the example I have on the screen. So up here in the heading, I'm going to put a link to a CSS file. Once I determined what my file name is going to be as madlibs.css, I should create a new file and save it. So I use madlibs.css for a file name. The first thing is, let's change the font for everything to be font family sans serif. And you also notice everywhere I have a span tag in my examples, I'm using the font weight as bold. So when I load up my index file with a CSS applied, you can see I have bold everywhere there is a keyword, and also I have sans serif fonts. Now at the top of the page, I'm going to insert some data entry text fields that I can use to update the story. So right below the H1 for Madlibs and then the instructions, I'm going to put in some text fields. So I'm going to say name as my first text field item. And so the first item will be the name that I'm going to ask for. Notice I'm using the ID equals txt name. That's just a format that I'm accustomed to using, is to do a prefix on every field or button on the screen using txt or btn. It just helps me remember what these things are called. Now you're going to have a lot more data entry types. And so we're going to have restaurant and number. And so create a data entry field with a unique ID for each of these keywords in your story. And once again, you can use the examples that I'm typing up here on the screen, or you can use ones that you've already created to be yours uniquely. So you'll get a long list of data entry fields. Let's save the work here, and let's see what it looks like now when I refresh my web page. And so now you can see we have a data entry field for each one of the keywords in our story. Now what's missing also is the button that we need to program. So let's add the button to our screen. And so we'll give it as a button, type equals button. And let's give it an ID so we can program it later. And I'm going to use the extension btn. Let's call it go. Okay, let's see what that looks like if I save the changes and update the page. And so you can see there's a small button down here. Okay, let's switch to our CSS file and let's do some formatting on the button. So I'm going to add a button tag, and let's set the background to be a color and the font to be a little bit larger and give it a bit of a rounded corner on the radius. Let's see what that looks like if I save it and refresh the page, and you can see now we have a larger button. Next it's time to add the jQuery, the programming. So let's go to our index.html page, and let's go to the bottom here just before body. And so here at the bottom of the page, let's add some links to jQuery and to our JavaScript files. So I'm going to start by adding a jQuery link. We're going to have to go to the internet to download jQuery. The second file that I'm going to add a script to is going to be our programming that we're going to call Madlibs. Now let's go create these two files that we just made reference to. First of all, let's make the JavaScript file here. So we'll go to New, and then we will save this as madlibs.js. We also need to have this jQuery.js file in our folder where the website is located. And so you can either copy this file from the last tutorial, or you go to jQuery.com and download it, rename the file as jQuery.js. Once you've got jQuery downloaded and set up properly on your computer, let's go test it out. Let's see if it works. I'm going to go into the madlibs.js file and use the document.ready command to see if we are actually working. So I'm going to call the function. The first thing I always do is check to see if it's working. So I'm going to do an alert and say ready to go. I'm going to my index.html and saving that file, and then to my web browser and refresh the page, and sure enough, ready to go pops up. So if you got that message, you're ready to go on. If you didn't get that message, go back and check your typing. Back to our JS file, the first thing I want to do is program something to go with this button. So let's go to our HTML file and find the button that we just created a second ago. It has an ID of btn capital Go. So we'll call a selector here and then do a click command with a function and then the brackets inside of there. And once again, we'll do an alert to see if actually it's working. And so let's save the changes. Refresh the page, click the button, and we get the alert that says clicked. Now when I click this button, I want to take some values from these text fields, these data entry points, and change the story to match those. So first of all, we need to create a variable to store the results of one of those text fields. So I'm going to say var x. You can use any letter or combination of letters for your variable names. But I'm going to say I want to get the value of one of these things. So to figure out what I'm trying to get the value of, I need to go back and look at my code again that I typed earlier. and see that the first data entry field I named as txt capital name. So I'm going to use that inside of these parentheses, # txt capital name. And then I'm going to give that variable the value of whatever is in that text field. Let's do a check to see if we're getting that. I'm going to alert the X and see if X indeed does store that value. See what I mean when I save this? Refresh the page and let's type something in for the name. Let's call the guy Jimmy and click make the story, and now it is echoing back to me in the alert box, Jimmy. So that means that I am indeed saving the value of the field into the variable X because I just alerted X to the screen and I got Jimmy. Now, I don't want to alert to the screen. I want to send this value into the story. So I'm going to select everything in the story that is of the class name. So let's put in here a period, name, and then put a .html, and I'm going to use the letter X. So now all mics will be changed to Jimmy if I type Jimmy in the story. Now I have a lot more work to do because I have restaurant, number, companion, adjective. I've got a lot of text fields here. And so in my code, I'm going to simply supply the value of X to be whatever was in that text field. And then you can see I put it into the story as a HTML substitution. And so you can use the code on the screen that I'm typing here, or yours might be different because you have different types of story item. Now you notice that some of these have a # like type of sport because they're only used once. But the word dessert was actually used more than once in the story, and so I'm substituting everything that has a class of dessert. Let's save the changes here. And let's go back to our page. Now I'm going to type in something for every one of these items and check to see if they actually substitute. And so as you scroll down the page, you can see all my ideas have been placed into the story, and so the Mad Libs is almost done. Now I'd like to hide these things, these text fields, as soon as they have been entered. To make those hide, I need to create a div around the entire section. So I'm going to scroll to the top of the area where the questions are and add a div and give it an ID as the questions. And then near the end, well actually at the end, after the button, I'm going to put in the other end of the div. Let's save that. And then add one more thing into my JavaScript program. After I create the story, I'm going to hide the questions. So let's save this. Come over here and refresh the page, retype the things, and let's click Make the Story. So now, when I am done, I click Make the Story, and the questions disappear, and only the story remains. So if you want to make another story, you have to refresh the page, retype in the answers, and next time you'll get a different story. So in this tutorial, you learned how to get values out of text fields and how to place them into a story using a variable.